Hello, how are you doing? I have quite a busy morning of work in front of me, but I'm hoping this afternoon I'll get a good chunk of quality reading time. And why does there have to be work? Why can't we just read all the time? But I have a big pile of new books that I think sound really good, so I'm going to talk through all of these and give some descriptions of them and why I'm interested in reading them. But first off, there's a very special book, which is not a novel, but is a notebook. It's a journal of the Women's Prize for Fiction, celebrating 25 years of this prize, which you may have heard me talking about on a few occasions. And this is published by Unbounders, and this is a publisher that works through crowdsourced funding. So if enough people pledge for a book to be published, then it does get published. And I pledged to have this book published, I think in the late autumn sometime, because last year was the 25th anniversary of the book prize, and now it's been published in this beautiful edition. So this is a notebook, and I have a signed bookplate by Kate Moss, who's the founder of the prize, and there's a bookmark, and it says in the front of it that it lists all of the books that have won the Women's Prize in the past. So I think it's quite a neat thing. You can go through and tick all of the ones you've read, and the ones you haven't read, you can then plan on reading them. And actually, there's several of these which I haven't read. I mean, being such a fan of the prize, you'd think I would have read all of the books by now. But there was a period, I think, like especially in the early 2000s, when I was sort of following the prize and I was reading some of the books that were listed for it, but I didn't read all of the books that were listed for it. So there was it was quite often I hadn't actually read the winner for that year. So I wonder how many I've actually read. Let me count up. Okay, I've actually only read 15 of the 25 books that have won the Women's Prize. So that's, yeah, so I have some catching up to do, but it's quite fun that in different sections of this book, it'll have the title of one of the winners and then some blank pages following it, some information about that book, but then some blank pages following it where you can write your own notes and memorable quotes and, you know, your impressions and ideas about the novel. So yeah, I think that's quite fun, and yeah, it's just a great thing to have, celebrating this book prize. Then I have a group of books which have been newly published in March and publishers have kindly sent me copies of. So first off, there's a debut novel called King of Rabbits by Karla Neblett, and this is the story of a boy named Kai who grows up within a mixed race family on a council estate in rural Somerset. And I think on the one side of the story, it's this kind of sweet coming-of-age story about him and his friendships, and how he has a strong connection with a rabbit, a pet rabbit, and his connection with the natural world. And on the other side, his perception of these very adult issues that he encounters. So he has three older sisters who all have different fathers, and his father struggles with drug addiction. And so yeah, it's about the clash between these two worlds, which makes it a beautiful and painful and sometimes quite funny novel. But also the inside cover of this is very lovely. So yeah, I just love how it's this kind of, yeah, about the sort of natural world, and I think reflecting his connection with the natural world. And yeah, it just sounds like a really good novel. Another debut novel is Common Ground by Naomi Ishiguro, and I almost don't like to mention this because it seems to unfairly set expectations for what her writing will be. But Naomi Ishiguro is the daughter of Kazuo Ishiguro. She's published a collection of short stories before, but this is her first novel. And so yeah, I mean, could you imagine being the daughter of a Nobel Prize winner and then bringing out your own writing and then have these very high expectations set for what it'll be like. So this is the story of a boy who's very lonely and doesn't have many friends, but then he meets someone who's very outgoing and sociable and positive, that just changes his whole perspective on things. And then many years later, when they become adults, their positions are almost reversed, where this boy who was once lonely has become very successful, and his friend has become a bit reclusive now. And so it's about their newfound connection with with each other at this later point in their lives. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at friendship and the different ways we support each other throughout our lives, when we have different needs at different points in our lives. And I'm just quite eager to see what it's like. Then I have a very special book, which is an anthology called The Penguin Book of Feminist Writing, which takes writing from different women and feminists from all across the centuries, starting in the 1400s all up until the present day, and writing from 2020. It goes all the way back to the 1400s with an author named Christine de Pizan, up until the writings of like Susan Sontag and Doris Lessing and Sylvia Plath and Liz Lockhead and Angela Davis. And it takes writers from all over the world as well. So looks really fascinating. I think this will be a great reference book to go back to again and again to read different pieces of writing and how these writers, agree with each other or disagree with each other or advance different ideas about feminism at different points in the centuries. And just what a treasure this book is. Another new book of nonfiction and a collection of essays is A Little Devil in America by Hanif Abdurraquib. And these are essays looking at the history of Black performances in a number of different areas, from sport to music to stand-up to sitcoms, and all of these areas where culture and politics combined in this lived experiences of these performances. And I think they're quite like personal essays, but also looking at the broader culture. So there's an essay called An Epilogue for Aretha, and there's a essay called 16 Ways of Looking at Blackface, and there's a essay called Beyonce Performs at the Super Bowl, and I Think About All the Jobs I've Hated. So I think the author is very present in these essays, talking about his own experience and perspective in relation to the broader culture of Black performances. I have a debut collection of poetry called Eat or We Both Starve by Victoria Kennefick, and these are poems which look at common experiences like romance or family life, but which ask the question of how do we live with the past but not be consumed by it, which is a really poignant question, I think, because me, like a lot of people, can get caught up thinking about the past and certain experiences of the past and reliving them again and again in my mind. And I think this is the way memory works and experience works, but not to allow these past experiences to completely inhibit us from making new experiences in the future. There's a big new novel called The Things We've Seen by Agustin Fernandez Mallo, and this is a writer I've not read before, but he's meant to be very influential in the Spanish literary scene. And this novel is in 3 different parts. So the first part is about a writer that goes to an uninhabited island that was used as a concentration camp during the Spanish Civil War. The second part is about an astronaut that was on the first trip to the moon and is reflecting about his experiences in the Vietnam War. And then the third part is about a woman who goes to the beaches of Normandy and is sort of reliving the experiences of the war there, or going through the steps of the experiences of the war that took place there. And I'm not sure how these different parts combine together, or if they intersect in any ways, or if they just sort of work on various themes that sort of comment upon each other. But it'll be really interesting to see how they all work together. And so it is quite a long novel. It's almost 500 pages long, quite like dense text. And I'm quite curious to read this writer. It's been described as a sort of combination between W.G. Sebald and David Lynch's writing. And so I'm quite excited to try. Damned If I Do by Percival Everett. This is a writer I've always meant to read, but never got around to. And this book of short stories was first published in 2004 in America, but it's only just now been published in the UK for the very first time. So these are short stories that look at class and race and prejudice, that all satirize and celebrate the human condition in different ways. Whiteout Conditions by Tariq, Shah. This is a debut novel. It's a road trip novel about a man that returns back for the funeral of his oldest friend, and he meets his friend's cousin, and they go on this trip together to the funeral where they relive old times and they do drugs and they sort of grapple with the disillusionment of adulthood. The Dragons, the Giant, the Women by Wayetu Moore. This is a memoir about the author's experiences growing up in Liberia till she was the age of 5 when her family were forced to flee the country and move to America. So it's about their different experiences and the past of this history. And I've heard really great things about this. This was published in America last year, and I think Anne Patchett was talking about how much she loved it, and I got it on audiobook at that time, but didn't get around to listening to that. And so I'm very eager to read the physical copy of this, while I think then simultaneously listening to the audiobook while going out on walks and stuff, as I like to do. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading this memoir. I've talked in recent book hauls how Penguin Modern Classics have been reprinting the work of Sylvia Townsend Warner, who is a really interesting early 20th century English writer. And so they've brought out 2 new editions of her books. One is After the Death of Don Juan, which is about the famous libertine and about his disappearance and how a woman who he tried to seduce is determined to find out what happened to him. So it's about her experiences in that, but also the experiences of the Spanish Civil War. And then there is the novel The Flint Anchor, which is about a merchant in Norfolk and his family, and how he's sort of a tyrannical presence in his family's life, and they're largely unhappy, how his wife drinks a lot, and it follows their fates and fortunes over a number of decades. And this was actually Sylvia Townsend Warner's final novel. So yeah, it'll be really interesting to explore more of her work, because she was very varied in the subjects and the themes and the styles in which she wrote. I have 2 more new reprints which are brought out by Handheld Press, which is a really interesting publisher that reprints forgotten work from the 20th century. So the first is a novel called There's No Story There by Inez Holden, which is about a group of people that work in a munitions factory in the north of England during World War II. And this was published in the 1940s, first published in the 1940s. And it's about, their different lives and how they are affected by the war and the sort of fallout of all the experiences from that. And then there is a collection of journals from Margaret Kennedy called Where Stands a Winged Sentry, and it's about her experiences during the war and her reflections on that, the experience of the country on the brink of war immediately before World War II, and about how this sort of looming presence of sort of inevitability of the war that is coming and what that will do to the country. So yeah, I'm very eager to explore and read these. Another new book, which is World War II related, is The Frequency of Us by Keith Stewart. This is a new novel which is about a military wireless engineer in the city of Bath who meets an Austrian refugee, and they fall in love and they get married to each other. But shortly after their marriage, their home is bombed and she disappears, and everyone sort of pretends that she had never even existed. So this man goes on to live a very lonely and solemn life, and many years later a social worker starts interacting with him and tries to find out what happened to this woman that everyone pretends she just disappeared. And I'm so intrigued by this story because just recently I watched a couple of very old films, one called The Lady Vanishes, and the other one is an English film called So Long at the Fair, and they're both stories about an individual that vanishes, but everyone around the central characters in the story pretend that this person never existed. So it's quite an interesting premise for a story, and I'm interested to see how this plays out in this novel. Dryland by Sarah Jaffe. This is a novel about a 15-year-old girl named Julie who's growing up during the 1990s in Oregon, and it's her coming-of-age story, but also about how she has an older brother who was set to be a champion swimmer and diver, but who has disappeared and gone missing. So it's another fiction about a disappearing person, but also about how she forms a connection with a girl that gets her into swimming as well, and they have a romance with each other and a sort of blossoming love story. But this is described as an anti-coming out novel. I'm not really sure what that means. It says it captures the gauzy queer exploration at its quietest and its most loud. So I'm not sure if that means it's sort of about the experience of someone who never actually comes out, or it's about how coming out isn't really like a necessary thing for some people. But yeah, so I'm sort of interested to see how that plays out. In Ordinary Woman by Buki Papillon, this has a beautiful cover. So this is about a child named Otto that goes to a boarding school in Nigeria, and Otto has been raised as a boy but really feels themselves to be a girl, has always been raised that way. So it's about the challenge of being an intersex child and their experiences going to boarding school and longing for a freedom that they feel that they can only get by moving to America. So yeah, sounds like a really good, powerful story. His Only Wife by Peace Adzo Medi. This is about a young woman in Ghana whose family convinces her to marry a man she doesn't know. And what seems at first like a fairy tale relationship quickly changes when she learns more about her husband that she didn't know before. And so it's about her struggle to try to stay true to who she is, while also living as the wife of this man. And Wayetu Moore, who I mentioned earlier, calls this a hilarious gem of a debut. Then I have a group of beautiful new reprints of Neil Gaiman's books published by Headline, and I have to admit I've never read Neil Gaiman before. I don't really know whether I'll sort of get on with his brand of literary fantasy, so I've always felt a bit unsure and slightly intimidated to read him, though I don't know why I would be intimidated. But yeah, I just have never got around to reading him. Not sure if I'll like him. So let me know in the comments if you're a fan and if you would really encourage me to read him before. So I know that a number of his books have been adapted to films and TVs before, like American Gods, this big like saga has been adapted into a multi-part series, I think on Amazon, and yeah, Stardust was made into a film, and so I know he's very critically acclaimed, but yeah, I've just never got around to reading him before. Looking for Eliza by Leif Arbuthnot. This is a novel about a woman who is an older woman who is a widow, and she's feeling quite lonely, so she initiates this scheme called Adopt a Grandmother, and through it she meets a younger woman who's struggling with various things. So it's about their connection with each other, and I just love stories about intergenerational friendships, so I think this sounds really good. My Brilliant Life by A. Ran Kim, and it's translated from the Korean by Chi-Yun Kim. So this is another story which is sort of about intergenerational friendship, about a boy that sort of lives vicariously through the stories that his parents and family tell him and that his neighbors tell him, and he's collecting all these stories into a manuscript that he wants to present to his parents on his birthday. So that sounds like quite a sweet story. Kitchenly 434 by Alan Warner. This is the author of many critically acclaimed books like Morven Caller, and this novel is sort of a twist on the English country house novel. It's set in the 1970s on the brink of Margaret Thatcher becoming Prime Minister, and it's about a man who's a famous guitarist in a rock band, and about his butler that cares for his English country house when he's not there. So it's about both of their lives, and it's meant to be, I think, quite a comic novel. So yeah, this sounds really enjoyable. And finally, finally, there is the novel Saint X by Alexis Shaitkin. So this is a novel about a girl who goes on a trip with her family to the Caribbean and how her sister disappears and is found murdered while they're on this holiday. So how she's obviously very haunted by this experience and wondering what actually happened to her sister. And many years later, when she's living in New York City, she meets a cabbie that happens to be one of the men. Oh, there's a big siren going by. He happens to be one of the men that was accused of her murder, of her sister's murder, but was found innocent. So yeah, that sounds like quite an intriguing story. I think this is meant to be like really like a thriller, but I'm slightly skeptical about this story because whenever like big coincidences happen in novels like this, I'm always sort of slightly skeptical about whether that actually happened. Though I think it's a slightly unfair criticism sometimes because sometimes really big coincidences happen in our lives, and if we had put those into a novel, like I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't believe that they'd actually happened. So yeah, strange things happen sometimes. And also Joyce Carol Oates blurbed this book, and of course I can't have a video go by where I don't mention Joyce Carol Oates, but she said it is richly atmospheric, by turns coolly satiric, and warmly romantic. Alexis Shaitkin's brilliant debut novel Saint X is irresistibly suspenseful. So those are all the books I want to talk about. Let me know if you've read any of these books or which of these books you're most interested in reading. I hope you get some good reading time today, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.